Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the weekly Wednesday for the Financial Freedom newsletter, where every week, every Wednesday, we delve into something inspirational, motivational, something excerpt taken from the Financial Freedom weekly newsletter. Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Google, be sure to click the like, subscribe, share, comment. And without ado, let's get into the show. Welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom for Physicians podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about 4 different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. And in that light, I'm always trying to spread the word, the message about freedom, highlighting, showcasing entrepreneurs, and sharing those conversations with you. So today we have a creative entrepreneur, Ashton, and she's actually passionate about spreading the concept that drawing can be used as a thinking tool, which is very interesting. So today we're going to talk all about presentations, creative business, drawing, and using it as a tool. So I'll let Ashton talk about her business, introduce herself, and bring her onto the show. So Ashton, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Anytime that I get to talk a little bit about what I do and all the inner workings behind it, and I can stand on my soapbox for a little bit, I'm so down. So thank you for welcoming me here to talk to your audience today.
Yeah, and it's I'm always, like I said, I'm always interested in creatives because that's the next generation that's going to impact the world in the future. And so tell us more about yourself, your business, how you got started, and so on.
Yeah, so when I was younger and trying to decide what I wanted to sort of be when I grew up, I actually just wanted to be a mom. And that was my ambition in life, was just to be a mother. So I took some education to educate small children, and that sort of led me into working at a nonprofit family center. And that introduced me into the world of facilitation. And I absolutely fell in love with the world of facilitation and group process, and about how you can help people come to their own wisdom by just asking good questions and creating a really safe space. And I just really, really fell in love with facilitation. And few years into doing that type of work, I learned about graphic facilitation, and I've always been very creative. Even though I didn't actually draw a whole lot, I tried lots of different art mediums. I just took like a 1-day course on graphic facilitation, and I was like, this is it. And that was about 9 years ago. I had a few children. I have 3 kids. So I fulfilled that whole desire of being a mother. So I really started my work as a graphic facilitator, graphic recorder, while also having children. So I also kind of have that, I didn't necessarily have the luxury of starting a whole business and then having children. So I kind of it's all I've ever known to, is just sort of juggling this entrepreneurial life with this really interesting creative business, while also being a parent to 3 small kids. So that's the quick and dirty of it. That's the high level story of my life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you talk about drawing or creative facilitation, and what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so kind of happens in a few different ways, but it's the same skill set that I use. So if you think about facilitation, when you're facilitating, you hear what people are saying, and you feed back to them in words what it is that you're hearing, and help make people, or help the people in the room kind of connect their own dots, right? And let's say you're talking about a vision or a strategy, like you're moving towards something, and how all the voices in the room are contributing to what that is going to be. So if you think about it from that perspective, just add drawings on top of it. So instead of hearing what someone has to say and feeding it back in words, and feeding it back in pictures. So creating a visual representation of what was just said in the room, or a presentation at a conference, and so on. And since most people think in pictures, and of course the cliche, picture's worth 1,000 words, it resonates with most people in the room. Even if they can't articulate why it does resonate with them, they just know that it does. So yeah, it's something like special to be able to see your own words in graphic format, right? So sometimes I do like a lot of conferences where I get asked to kind of do all the presentations that happen during that day. And then I'm also asked to kind of be in more facilitation type settings where there's a strategic plan that they're trying to develop. And I create a visual representation of what they've just said in trying to come up with that plan. So yeah, basically wherever there's like really complex content, we need to simplify it. It's just really, for me, it's just about simplifying. It's like, how do we get this information across? And we live in such a space now where it's instant gratification, right? We want to know the information now. And I love that the graphics can, you take a look at it for 10, 15 seconds and you can get the big idea that person was trying to get across, or what was said in that meeting, right? So I love that aspect of it too.
Yeah. Now, is there any I find it very interesting that, you can draw and you can doodle, and that can sort of lead to like new insights or new ideas. But when you're drawing for example, like a presentation or a meeting, are there any particular techniques or strategies, or is it pretty much free form and you sort of create the associations? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, the way that I like to work is very sort of free flowing. I don't like to know a whole lot going into it, but there is an element of risk involved with that because you don't know how polished that speaker might be, or if that meeting that you're going into, if they have a safe culture, right? So there is like an element of risk every time. But I like the fact that you mentioned doodling, because I think a lot of us experience this and have a similar story of getting in trouble for doodling in our notes as we were growing up, right? And now there's research, not as much as I would like, but there's some research and statistics out there now around how drawing can help you retain. So just the sheer fact of doodling can help you retain up to 29% more information, right? So that's like a pretty powerful statistic in terms of just helping you remember, even if your doodles have nothing to do with the content, right? So that's where I like to sort of kind of get involved, is helping make the doodle a little bit more purposeful. The way that I sort of see it, trying to remember what your question was now, is around it's like an interpretation. So if you think of any other language, like I think I would be a sign language interpreter if I didn't do this work, because I started down that route at one point. I took all the prerequisites to get into the program. And if you think about sign language, someone at the front of the room, they're hearing it and they're putting it into the hand gestures, right, in real time. Whereas I'm doing the same interpretation just from a drawing perspective. So that real timeness. And I like it when people can see the drawing happen and then they're hearing it and then they're seeing it. It's like reaffirming for them what they've just heard. So yeah. And I think just doodling and going and taking your own notes and adding doodles and graphics into your own notes can be a pretty powerful tool. Like, obviously I'm doing it on like a super professional level, but I love it when people share with me the drawings that they've done in their little notebooks. Of course they're like, oh, they're so bad. I'm like, no, like it's almost like the worse they are, the better. And sometimes when you're taking your own notes for yourself. Right. So yeah. And that's where I was, when you introduced me about, drawing as a powerful thinking tool, where I think a lot of people see drawing as, something you go to a museum and you look at a beautiful drawing and you're like, wow, that's nice. But I think drawing can be a really powerful tool to help yourself think.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And do you find that this helps more for audio learners, visual learners, or anyone? Or tell us more about that.
There's a lot of debate about this whole learning styles thing. It's such a funny thing because people still, I think, refer to themselves as like, oh, I'm a visual learner, oh, I'm an audio learner, blah, blah, blah. But apparently that's been debunked. So like, who knows? But I think people know, even if it's been debunked, that you have like a learning style. People do have a preference whether or not they like to take in information in an audio way like this podcast, or if they want to watch a YouTube video, right? So, anybody who likes to be able to be like, especially if you're going to take their own notes and add some drawings in, that's sort of like kinesthetic, like hands-on learning style, as well as anybody who, would prefer to watch a YouTube video would probably resonate with this type of thing.
Yeah, it's and so tell us more about what you've learned drawing 2000 presentations.
Yeah, it's probably close to 3,000 at this point because that's my number from last year. I haven't updated it. I need to do I always do my numbers at the end of the year, but I have learned a lot. I can usually tell, especially with presentations in the first few minutes, if it's going to be difficult, if it's going to be a tricky one. Just people, how they set it up, how fast they talk, sort of their energy behind it. It's, I feel like I could start a whole other business on how to do better, like PowerPoint present at this point. But the thing that I get to learn about a lot of different industries because I don't work in just one industry, even though I do have a lot in the tech space. I get to learn so much. Like I was learning about fishing rights, the indigenous fishing rights last week, like just really fascinating, interesting topics that you'd never really get to like really be in on the conversation. And so, of course, from like a content perspective, I've learned so much from so many different industries, but I've also learned so many things about like the do's and don'ts, I think a little bit of some presentation. One thing I'll just say, one thing that I learned going from, I was all in person before March of 2020. All of it was paper and markers. And then March of 2020, of course, couldn't travel anymore. So I had to figure out how to do everything on the computer. And I learned very quickly how different presenting on a screen versus in a room is totally, totally different. And the biggest thing was how quick people talk. They talk way faster than they would if they were in person. So I had to really work extra hard to keep up with people. Even though they had 30 minutes, they finished in 20 because they spoke so fast, right? So I always just tell people like, please slow down. I also really got into sort of like some accessibility things of like things that people can do to make their presentation a little bit more accessible for folks too. Like one easy thing to do is just to describe what you look like before you start your presentation. You know, introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Ashton. I'm a white female with asymmetrical hair that has a little purple in it, and I'm sitting in a room that has a purple wall with some drawings behind me. Or just to kind of like help people who may have low vision or are blind, just that sort of like to be in on what's going on because they can't be, see it, what's happening. So, just things like that I've learned as well. So I'm sure I could talk for a whole hour just about those things, but there's just a couple there.
Yeah. And the other thing is, how do you actually draw conference presentations? What is your style? What is your method?
So if you think about it, I have this sort of formula where you're listening. So you're taking in information, you're trying to make sense of it, you're trying to connect the dots, and then you have your output, the capturing part. So it's this weird balance between all three at any given time. So even as you're drawing, you're still listening and trying to make sense of what's happening. And when you're capturing something 5 minutes down, into the presentation, it might loop back to something else they just said. So trying to sort of make those connections while you're also in this like real time balancing act of all three. So it's hard to explain, of course. But I think just going back to what I said earlier about this like interpretation, if you think about anybody who, knows multiple languages, they're in this like interpretation mode as well. But I have to sort of throw in that like making sense in the connections piece at the same time to try to make all of those ideas make sense. When someone starts their presentation going, I'm going to show you the 3 ways to la la la, like that's a little easier for me.
Yeah.
But when you don't necessarily know a whole lot, especially when I walk into these industries and I don't know a whole lot other than like maybe watching a few YouTube videos and reading a few articles before I get started to kind of help me a little bit. It's all very in the moment. Yeah.
What do you say to people when they say they can't draw or that's not them, it's kind of these rationalizations.
Yeah, that's a great one. I get that all of the time. And of course, I just want to shake them. I'm like, yes, you can. Like stick people are okay. Like it's okay to draw a stick person. And, going back to like, if you want to draw to help yourself think, it like doesn't have to look nice. Like in a way, it shouldn't look nice. Right. So, I just say like stick people are okay. You can upgrade to a star person if you want. You take a star and instead of the top of the star, it's a circle for a head and the little arms and legs. But yeah, it's my work looks nice because I've been doing it almost every day for 9.5 years or 9 years. So it's I always just tell people, if you spent just as much time as I did, your work, it would probably even look better than mine. You know what I mean? So I don't think you even have to even consider yourself a real creative person in order to get the benefits. And that's what it is all goes back to, is the benefits of just making some marks to help yourself think. Sunny Brown, who wrote a book called The Doodle Revolution, and she has a quote of her definition of a doodle, and it's to make meaningless marks to help yourself think, and that's what it should be about. Less about trying to create a piece of art.
And I know we're coming close to the end of our conversation, which has been really interesting, is, how can people get started with sketchnoting or visual note taking? And then what are some of the benefits you would let them, or you would tell them by visually capturing information and or doodling?
Yeah, I think I have a little freebie book. There's a Sketchnote 101, which we can share with your people, that just sort of gives a high level overview. I'm in the process of writing a book, actually. I'm hoping it will be out in early 2023. So you can keep an eye out on that. It's a beginner's guide. So it starts something as like simple as drawing a straight line, like real basic. So I would just encourage people to, if this is something that they're interested, there's lots of resources out there, and they could certainly reach out to me if they want some help getting started. And yeah, I think the biggest thing is just, take the doodles that you're already doing and see if you can draw like a little, box or a little circle or a little something to help connect ideas. One of the easiest things that I tell people to get started with, like at its like very core, like first thing is do not capture on lined paper. Try to get just a blank white piece of paper and turn it on its side, so like landscape style, and that will just totally change the way that you capture without even really trying. Because if you stay on the lined paper, your brain's just going to want to go back to that sort of linear capturing. And if you take a white piece of paper, turn it on its side, you're just totally like changing the whole dynamic. And then that way you start kind of capturing all over the page, and you can make lines to connect ideas, right? So that's just like a nice introduction way. You don't have to have anything fancy. You don't need a fancy sketchbook. You just need a pencil and a white piece of paper. You could get, like, if you're like me and you like all your fancy tools and markers and all this stuff, you can get those later. But just to get started, all you need is a blank piece of paper and a pencil.
This was a really fascinating discussion. I really, got a lot of insights and takeaways, and, kind of how to use your creativity and imagination. How do people in the audience that are listening follow you, visit your website, see your work, etc.?
Yeah, so my business is Mind's Eye Creative, and my website is mindseyecreative.ca. And you can find my socials there on my website. I would say right now my most active one that I'm on is Twitter, which is Mind's Eye CCF. And yeah, that's probably the best way to sort of get in touch with me. And I do have a YouTube channel, and I have some drawing tutorials, and I talk a little bit more in depth about graphic facilitation, graphic recording, and sketchnoting, and all that good stuff, and the kind of different tools, tech tools and physical analog tools that I use. So if you want to geek out about markers and all of that kind of stuff, and watch some tutorials on how to draw some different elements, you can go check that out too.
And for all the audience out there listening, Ashton's resources will be in the links and show notes. Thanks so much for a great discussion. And we look forward to hearing about your future success.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
I hope you really enjoyed that wonderful, inspirational, motivational piece. Again, wherever you are listening, if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Audible. And without much ado, be sure to thank this show's sponsors, and we'll see you next week.